Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new episode of LavaCon, where we gather and share expert insights on security program management delivered with, by, and for the most respected security leaders around the world. Together, we'll explore solutions to the most pressing business challenges unique to the careers of CISOs and cybersecurity executives. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello there, this is Sean Martin, and you're very welcome to a new episode of the Blue Lava Community here on ITSP Magazine. Here's where we get to talk about all things for the CISO, by the CISO, and we actually have somebody who knows this role extremely well. Rock Lambros, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sean.
And you're a familiar face in the community on ITSP Magazine and certainly in the Blue Lava community as well. And there may be some folks still that don't know who Rock is, the infamous Rock. So a few moments, your role, what you're up to, and why this topic of OT-IT security convergence today.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. So I'm Rock Lambros, the CEO and founder of RockCyber, a cybersecurity consulting organization based in Denver, Colorado. I've been in the industry for well over 20 years, mostly as a practitioner. We founded RockCyber about 3.5 years ago. Prior to founding RockCyber, and most relevant for the topic that we're discussing today, I built and led the IT and OT security program for an oil and gas company here in Denver that was then later acquired by Marathon Petroleum. And then, after a couple of years of integration there, decided I wanted to hang my own shingle, and here we are. Thank you, Sean, for having me.
Super cool. And I guess the first question I want to ask is how prevalent OT is in the world of it. Now, I presume the CISOs listening to this will either know if OT is prevalent for them or not. Right. But generally speaking, I want to get a sense of that, and then we'll get into how involved is the CISO in securing OT, which we'll dig into later. But just generally, do you see a lot of OT in general business, or is it still kind of stuck in oil and gas and manufacturing and maybe healthcare? Or where do you see OT? Does IoT change that picture?
I think IoT does change that picture, and IoT, or industrialized IoT, is essentially the fabric that underlies IT-OT convergence. But let's talk about what OT is for a second and just kind of lay the groundwork. And OT is really any programmable system or device that monitors and controls physical processes and infrastructure components. So think things like power turbines, oil and gas pipelines, medical devices, things of the such. So I think we're IT-OT convergence. I mean, we're seeing it more in industry because I think it's becoming like table stakes just for competing in the market. This convergence is allowing companies to introduce cost savings by lowering operating costs through optimizing resource utilization, better performance by generating more and accurate and meaningful KPIs and OKRs, improve visibility end-to-end throughout the environment, access real-time data, and then increase operational standards across the organization.
So is there an example, Rock, where there's maybe it's the industrialized IoT device in an organization that perhaps IT is not aware of?
Oh, IT is not aware, often, sadly, all over the place in OT. And sometimes even OT isn't aware of IoT or industrialized IoT or even OT assets in OT. But, I mean, we could think of like devices. So oil and gas companies or power companies can reduce their operating costs by selling power power to the market or the power mix by optimizing the power mix of the energy they sell to the market based on the prevailing energy commodity prices. So things like that.
And is that so? I can in oil and gas, in manufacture, I can see valves and machinery and things like that. But I'm thinking I'm thinking of a building, right, where a company operates, and maybe physical security walks around and they have to tap a sensor. Is that considered IT or OT?
I consider it operational technology because it affects a change on a physical device, meaning, you scan a badge on a badge reader, it flips a lock, right? Or it flips a magnetic lock. But in buildings, you see obviously the physical security systems, the cameras, building management systems, HVAC, right? All that stuff I would consider OT.
And that harkens back to a nice HVAC story that we heard many, many years ago. So I presume a lot of people might think that. All right, so that gives me a good picture. So there are certainly things running on networks that are not IT devices. So talk to me about the network then. Are they completely separate networks? And is that why IT is not aware of them, or do they cross over onto IT networks? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's kind of like multi-layered, right? So from a technology standpoint, they should be separate networks, IT and OT. Obviously, the convergence means there's some sort of connectivity, transferring of data, whatnot between the two networks. An FBI agent once told me, and I love this analogy, that a totally air-gapped network is like a unicorn. Everybody's heard of them, but nobody's actually seen one. And now we've even seen radio attacks that can jump and bridge air-gapped networks. But then the second layer to that is also culturally. IT and operations folks have different, traditionally different goals in the business, different missions. From an IT security side, we typically think of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the classic CIA triad. But on the operations side, it is all about safety, resilience, and integrity. So think about it like availability, integrity, and then confidentiality, right? So the priorities are flipped. So the cultures are different. And frankly, historically, oftentimes the two groups didn't talk. The OT people didn't want IT messing around their environments because they don't understand operations. And from an IT perspective, we have been guilty, knocking systems offline by accident. OT systems tend to be older. They're in life, they're in use for many, 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 many years. So sometimes there are devices out there where a mere vulnerability scan will knock them over. So we have to be very cognizant of that.
And Rock, quickly, the culture and the upside down CAA, if you will.
Yeah.
What's that driven by? I suspect it's driven by risk, right? So the physical risk in the OT world, somebody's hand might get chopped off, right?
Absolutely.
Versus ransomware, where privacy and availability are more in tune.
Exactly.
Is that? And can you share any story maybe from the oil and gas what types of risks are they even driven by risk? Is that safety risk all they care about all day and every day, or do they not care about risk and something else that is
safety is very front and foremost in their minds. Pretty much in oil and gas, manufacturing, power, water, whatever the case may be. They'll have an environmental and safety group usually, or health and safety group, or it might be called different things within the organization, to the point where at the beginning of every shift at a plant, there'll be a safety brief, or at the beginning of every meeting, there'll be a safety brief, even if it's just 30 seconds. So safety is ingrained into the culture.
And I'm just wondering, because as we're starting to talk here, I'm just thinking this is a group that's probably been operating maybe even longer than IT folks.
Absolutely.
Right? Building cars before computers, just as an example. I'm just thinking there might be some things we can learn from them. I don't know. Are they considered? Is there an OT safety? You said there's an OT safety group. Are they considered the Department of No, like IT security is?
Maybe sometimes, right? I've still seen injuries or heard about injuries that are caused by simply using the wrong tools, right? And where the safety people are always like, hey, use the right tool for the right job. But sometimes maybe the operator doesn't want to walk 100 yards back to the shop to grab another tool, so they use a screwdriver and a hammer to try and pry open a panel or whatever versus getting the proper tool. So I've definitely heard stories like that, and so you can think about that as sometimes people do bypass, I guess you could say, safety controls. Much in the way that sometimes people try and bypass IT security controls.
And so this idea of safety being discussed at the beginning of every meeting, I'm just wondering, do we see a parallel there for IT security? Forgetting about the convergence at the moment, I'm just wondering, do we do enough of that? Is that something we should learn from there?
Interesting.
Is the business involved? I guess is the other question. Does the business have that conversation? Because as security folks, clearly we have that. What's the top risk, and do we have the controls, and how are we going to deal with it if those fail? I presume that the OT safety team has that same. The question I guess I have is that conversation for OT safety at the board and exec level as well?
It absolutely is. I've seen it with just about every enterprise risk management group of call it an industrial sector company that I've worked with. It's listed in the enterprise risk management risk register. Whether it could be listed under operational safety, health and safety. It's right up there with financial risks and market risks and other operational risks and now finally seeing more and more cybersecurity risks, but it is definitely discussed about at that level.
All right, so let's talk convergence now then. So we started with the network. So clearly devices might sit on one or the other, both networks, and share information to help drive better business decisions, right? Or better risk management decisions as well, maybe both. And so with that, we have to deal with some things. We'll get into that, but I want to talk about the convergence at the business level, because if we're talking different cultures, different objectives, different goals, different conversation, I know we often talk about how CISOs have a difficult time speaking IT security and business language, right? To help the executive leadership team understand and then take the right actions. Where does the convergence happen at that exec level where IT and OT are presenting as one? And I don't know, I presume maybe talking different languages as well and not really connecting the dots. So I don't know, are you seeing good things there or what's going on?
I'm still seeing challenges there. IT and OT will typically still roll up to different silos within the organization. Obviously everybody ultimately rolls up to the CEO, right? But I think there's still challenges there. I think that, the biggest mistake that we do from an IT community and an information or cybersecurity community, I should say, is treat OT like IT. It's not. It's totally different. Devices, OT devices were manufactured, some of them decades ago, and they were never intended to be connected in the way they are now. So security wasn't in the forefront, both at the firmware level and at the software level. And those devices may be in use some of those devices could be in use for 10, 20 years. And as cybersecurity professionals on the IT side, we can't go and be laughed out of a room if you go into a gas plant or a power plant or a manufacturing line and tell them that they have to shut the plant down to patch a bunch of systems per se. You're going to wait until the plant turnover to do that. An annual maintenance window or biannual maintenance window. So what other controls can we put in place? How can we work with the operational groups to essentially put giant bubble wrap around those systems?
Now, quickly, Rock, because let's just take patching as an example.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I'll say the leader of the OT group sitting in the room with the leader of the IT group, and there are patches in both environments. How does that conversation look from a risk management perspective? Where IT, maybe they don't get it right all the time. IT security may say, these are the critical patches. We have 5,000 of them. These are the 100 we're going to take care of this week. What does that conversation sound like in OT? Because what I'm picturing is a group saying, you don't know my environment. Stay out of my business. I'm not patching today, to your point. I'm waiting for that annual maintenance period to come.
Yeah. So historically, that division was absolutely the case. I'm seeing more and more. I mean, the OT side, they're starting to get it that cybersecurity is a thing, that the threats are out there, that the risks are out there. They watch the TV and read the news just like the rest of us, and so they're starting to see the impacts that cybersecurity can have to operational systems. Colonial Pipeline, as terrible as that situation was, brought huge awareness to OT security. And even though technically OT systems were not breached in the Colonial Pipeline incident, it led to an operational outage. It led to them shutting down the pipeline. So people have seen it. It's kinetic. It's tangible now. So there's more cooperation there. From a patch management standpoint specifically, most of the OT vendors will publish which patches they support, right? So if you're working on a HMI, human machine interface system that's running Windows, the software on top of it, perhaps a SCADA system, that vendor will publish, hey, these are the Windows patches that we support. And so from a change management standpoint, those are probably the patches you're deploying, and nothing more. So, and oftentimes they may be a patch Tuesday or two behind. So you have to take that risk into consideration as well.
And so is that a bottoms up type activity where it's the vendor saying, here's what you should do? Or are you seeing it as a top down risk management program driven activity that says, go find all the weaknesses and where we're at risk, and then go to that vendor, and either you already know because they told you, or you uncover that there are patches that you need to I'm just picking on patches for the moment, but is it a top-down ERM program, or is it a grease the squeaky wheel because that's all we have time to do program in OT specifically?
Yeah, historically, that grease the squeaky wheel mentality. Like, hey, go to the vendor, tell us what patches are available. We'll roll them up every 6 months or every year and just deploy them. Right? Oftentimes, there's not an A side and a B side to a plant, so you can't take a system down to patch it. I'm seeing more and more, though, from a risk management standpoint, vulnerability management in general is starting to become more of a thing in OT, and the traditional cybersecurity groups are driving that. So there's more collaboration there. But really, when it comes down to it, from the tactical application of it, again, you're probably only pushing the patches that the vendor supports. So while you're identifying more vulnerabilities and identifying the risks, the risk to operations typically outweighs the risk to not patching a particular vulnerability, because you may have other mitigating controls into place, right? You may have really good segmentation in place, or really good anomaly detection in place, to where you can quickly identify something if it's going haywire or something like that. So it does become a risk management discussion.
And is that converging? I think you mentioned that you're starting to see that converge a bit. How does that look? Is that what I'm trying to get to? Is the initial ERM view, right? What's the overall risk for the organization that then drives policy? And
Yep.
Ultimately, I want to get back to the old CIA or whatever order it's going to be, depending on who you're talking to. So first is, what's the risk? How do we translate that into policy that we can then flow to controls? Who owns that?
That's a great question.
I mean, a big company, there's probably a team, but as you work your way down into a small regional hospital, is there an ERM team? I don't know.
Yeah, undoubtedly there may not be an ERM team, but undoubtedly somebody owns risk at the organization. That could be the general counsel, that could be the CFO. Someone owns risk at the organization. Somewhere risk conversations are being had. And I think as security leaders, it's incumbent upon us to go make friends with those people. Having said that, for cybersecurity across the entire world, then it makes sense to try and integrate those risk and policy controls as much as possible. It's kind of why, if you think about it, we now use the term cybersecurity instead of just information security. Now, the challenge has been that, again, those OT systems were never designed to be connected in the way that they are. So now they're subject to new threats that were never even considered, and so now everybody has just assumed that the CISO has taken responsibility for mitigating those risks. And however, the CISO and the security team oftentimes don't have the authority to make changes within the corporate IT environment, much less that OT environment. So, we've kind of over the years, gone from, or, kind of split, and now you're seeing that convergence come back together about where the responsibilities and accountabilities lie. I am starting to see more cooperation between, call it the IT side and the OT side, which is fantastic. Everybody kind of gets the risk now. Everybody kind of gets the business value around IT OT convergence. So I think we're seeing some positive trends there. Now, again, who owns it from a policy standpoint? Typically the CISOs, and the CISOs who form, kind of steering committees or architecture groups that are cross-functional across the IT and OT side are usually the ones who are most successful in actually getting that policy applied to the OT level.
So is that a case of you've been managing IT security, so you must be good at managing OT security? Congratulations, Mr. Madam CISO. You have a new role.
That's the assumption. Absolutely.
Yeah. And have you seen any cases where there's a dedicated CO? So I'm making that term up. A chief operational security officer.
Yeah.
Is there a digital twin for that role, or does it does it really need to change? And everything falls under the CISO now.
I have not seen a chief OT security officer. Certainly, we're starting to see more OT security specialists being developed. There's great curriculum out there from SANS and ISA and various other groups to get specific OT security training. So I've seen some more dedicated OT security specialists. Maybe a 50-50 split. And what I've seen, like, do they roll up to the CISO or do they really roll up to the operations team and kind of have the dotted line back to the traditional security team?
And so with that, clearly, there are systems that are legacy, devices that are legacy. The culture is legacy, unless it's a new company, and perhaps there's an opportunity to start fresh. But I doesn't sound like the priorities of safety versus integrity and availability and privacy are going to shift between the two groups. So where will things come together in that sense? Because when you have somebody responsible for all of it, and there are competing priorities and objectives in different groups, how do you, and I don't know, maybe this is obvious for the CISO and not me, where you have different business processes and different priorities, and some things maybe availability is more important than other systems, integrity is more important. So maybe they're already doing some of this, but I'm just wondering how that culture comes together for CISO so they can manage different programs, if you will, successfully.
Yeah, listen, buying beers for the operations guys, it goes a long way, right? So
beer and donuts.
Beer and donuts, right? Pizza for the operations guys goes a long way. So it's really about building those relationships. And we've talked about it even here on ITSP before, how the soft skills for a CISO is critical, and that extends into collaborating with the operations teams, right? There's got to be collaboration, there's got to be communication, there's got to be cross functionality, there's got to be shared interests among the groups, and I think that shared interest among the groups ultimately comes down to operational resiliency. Whereas, like you said, on the IT side, that resiliency may be data led or privacy led, but on the operations side, the resiliency is absolutely, the getting stuff done led, right? Making sure gas is flowing through the pipeline, or making sure that water is treated, or making sure that widget is flowing off of the operations line. But I think it all bubbles up to organizational resiliency, and we are seeing more and more efforts holistically there from a business continuity standpoint, but that might be a different podcast.
I know we were joking before we started about the drama on social media platform Twitter.
Yeah.
On that platform, you'll see, I'll say, debates around how technical different roles need to be, and if one is missing the technical chops, they shouldn't be in a position or have a specific role. And I've seen that more at the analyst, manager, leader level for security, but I presume this still applies to the CISO role. What I'm really getting at is how much technical chops, what kind of technical chops does a CISO need to be successful in the IT security world compared to the OT security world? Can they get away with not knowing that environment and the technology stack and how it all functions? Do they rely on somebody else for that? Or I don't know, what does that look like?
I certainly don't think they could get away with knowing nothing about the environment, right? Because that's where we go back to kind of scaling back to what we know and then starting to treat OT like IT. They certainly need to have at least call it an entry level deep understanding of operational technologies, the differences between OT and IT, maybe some of the more common protocols and how they operate, and understanding just how kind of insecure they are. And then really understanding that priority of availability first versus confidentiality first. As you drive into it, right, different organizations will have different resources. So you can start leaning in on OT security specialists. But if you don't have resources for OT security specialists, go start leaning on, undoubtedly there are, I forget some of the titles, but effectively they're IT people on the OT side, right? So the people who are supporting those SCADA systems and the human management interfaces and the engineering workstations and whatnot. So start leaning on them to get some of that knowledge. And, before, you start writing a bunch of security controls and trying to push that over to the OT side, bounce things off of them, bounce things off of operational leadership to get buy-in. But I mean, you can't get away with knowing nothing. So you should absolutely go out and seek that knowledge, or bring in external experts to help, or whatnot. But I don't think they don't have to be like the analysts, hands-on keyboard level, right? And where you see that drama that you were just alluding to, everybody's got a bias from like how they see the world, right? So an analyst is going to see the world from an analyst perspective. Managers are going to see the world from a manager perspective. A gas plant managers are going to see the world from that perspective. So
I'll contest one thing you said, Rock. I get away with knowing nothing all the time.
Yeah, but you seek out the knowledge to learn, right?
Well, the question is, do I do it successfully? And who knows about that? I'm joking. You're spot on. I think, know enough to know who you need to lean on to do the job properly. I want to get into, as we begin to wrap here, maybe your definition of what success looks like. So let's speak directly to our CISO peers here. How do they measure success or define and measure success for their executive peers, so that they can communicate what's important, why they're doing it, and how well they're doing it? And then the other side of that coin, which is how do they define and talk about success for their teams, IT and OT now. So right. those two things.
So first, I think to set yourself up for success, you need to have a long-term vision of how to align your program to business goals, right? And those business goals are either revenue or cost reduction at some level, right? And
it's always money.
It always comes down to money, but you've got to achieve those goals, align to those goals and what you want to do operationally, and then figure out the technology and the security controls that you can put into place to support those goals. We on the IT side are notorious for buying the new shiny toy and then looking for a problem to solve versus the other way around.
Is that the equivalent of not walking to the shed for the new tool?
I'm sorry, is that the equivalent of what?
Well, it's not. Obviously, buying a new tool isn't the same as not walking to the shed to get the right tool. But in the example you gave earlier, but perhaps just because the tool is there doesn't mean you have to buy it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So then, I've seen successful IT OT convergence programs have, clear governance coming from the top, and a strategy for actually dealing with those cultural differences between IT and OT. Now, how do you measure that success? Well, let's go back to basic program management or project management. At the beginning of every project or program, you should be defining those KPIs and OKRs that are going to measure success. So what is from an IT-OT convergence, again, what's the goal? Is it to reduce operational costs? Is it to reduce or increase process efficiency? And then how do you measure those goals. And then obviously those are the goals that you measure against and report to. Now, upstream, downstream to your team, they're supporting these goals, and hopefully, they're incentivized by whether it be, they get to play with some new cool technologies that they've never gotten a chance to play with before, or they're motivated extrinsically, right? As the company does better, and as the company meets their top level OKRs, they benefit through bonuses or profit sharing or stock options, equity, whatever the case may be. So I think that's how you start connecting the dots.
Nice. Yeah, I like. I always refer to them as MBOs, different 3-letter combos for all of them. But anything that aligns folks and measures them and incentivizes them to be on the same page, I think is important. So, Rock, as we wrap here, what I'm trying to think what would be most useful for the CISOs to walk away with as they listen here. I'm looking for one thing that they can do this week, and I don't know if we wanted to target that message to. Well, let's just, I guess, presume everybody has some form of OT in their environment, right? So let's look at this from, there's OT there. They're not currently managing it from a security perspective. What's your one thing they could take away this week to start doing?
Go take the operations person out to lunch if you have access to them, right? You may be at a corporate office and they may be out at a remote plant or whatever, but start building those relationships with the operations people. Start understanding what they do on a day-to-day basis, how those technologies support those their goals. And what you're going to find is oftentimes asset management is terrible in IT. It's even worse in OT sometimes. So they may not even know what devices are all floating around in the network and where potential risks are. So start bridging, gaps that way, right? Help them, identify those assets. Maybe there are things from IT, from a process perspective that help in OT, like asset management, like identity management, vulnerability management, but really start to kind of learn that side of the business, how they do what they do, how that translates to organizational success, and then how you can align your programs and how you can support them. So again, I kind of go back to that cross-functional, call it, there could be a cross-functional governance team, there could be a cross-functional architecture team, to where, people from both sides of the equation, IT and OT, are evaluating new technologies, changes to the environment, risks to the environment, and whatnot. But it's really relationship building. Go start building those relationships.
All right, and so similar question. Let's look at a month out now, and maybe look back to your oil and gas example, where at the end you knew more than you did at the beginning. Are there any tips or tricks that, looking back on that program, you could say, if I'd done this at the beginning, I could have saved people time or bought fewer tools or used them more efficiently, or any insights from that you can give to your CISO group to say, just do this and you won't turn as gray or lose as much hair?
Yeah. In my case, maybe both. Take small bites of the elephant. The OT security challenge is massive, right? So find kind of small wins that you can achieve, and then that helps to start build the trust and confidence that you, as a holistic security program, take on more and more within that OT environment. So maybe you focus on, in my case, would have been a smaller gas plant, and that process is there, or maybe taking a look at a smaller problem on a measurement system, right? And then kind of start building your knowledge and capability that way. Yeah, I would say take small bites out of the elephant. It's going to be a long journey to be able to wrap your arms around just OT in general, and then much less the IT OT convergence challenge. So just take it one step at a time.
Well, it's a never-ending journey as well, right? There is no finish, or hopefully not.
Yeah. That's why we call it security programs, right? And I always make this very clear to when I was in the leadership role, but now with my clients that I consult with, is a project by definition has a start and an end. A program is more ongoing and maybe a collection of projects, and we have to think of it that way, right? It is truly programmatic.
Yeah, excellent point. And to wrap up here, Rock, you've done so much already for the community at large. You're a founding member of this Blue Lava community and paying it forward. Why is this important to you, and what do you hope to continue to contribute, and perhaps even as others in the community contribute, get from by being part of the community?
So my community has been integral to my success. From mentors that I've had in the past coming up through my career to then launching my company, my community, my network, my tribe, whatever you want to call it, has been absolutely critical to my success. And I feel that it's incredibly important for us to give back to the community to help bring up the next generation of cybersecurity practitioners and leaders, because the cybersecurity problem, as we know, is only growing. It's not going away. And there's way too much to do in cybersecurity in general for us to get into me as a consultant not talking to another consultant because there may be competition there. There's too much work. There's too much to do to not collaborate and then to go back and operate in silos. So I feel very strongly about trying to give back where I can and providing advice to others. As you can see, I kind of started this when I had hair down on my shoulders, and so I've got a little bit of knowledge behind me too that I've learned over the years that I'd like to give back.
I love that, Rock. And the conversation today shows that there's even more to do. Right? So it's not that we're stuck in a rut dealing with certain things over and over and over. We have new worlds to protect, and they have different priority, right? Safety of humans, and healthcare and manufacturing and other places, and that's important. And so to take on this challenge, I think to your point, Rock, we need to lean on each other, right? Partner with the OT group, lean on your peers in the CISO community here in Blue Lava, and as you pointed out, learn from each other. So thanks, Rock, for bringing that example and your insights to this conversation. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode or watching this episode if you happen to watch it. And I know there's a lot of resources in the community for you to tap into. Perhaps there's a couple Rock will share with everybody in the show notes. You mentioned a few standards and trainings and things like that. Perhaps those will be good to include. And with that, thanks everybody for being part of the Blue Lava community.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the LavaCom podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.